Hi, everybody out in TLDC land. So welcome. We are hosting a panel discussion today on the LMS. And we have three guests today who all have different needs and different perspectives on the LMS. So allow me to introduce you really quickly, and then I'll have them go ahead and introduce themselves. So we have Tom McDowall, which is actually, he's phoning in from the UK, right, Tom?
Yep.
Okay. Cyndi Nagel, who is out in Los Angeles. And Rebecca Prejean, Prejean. Have I said that right, Prejean?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, I knew a friend years ago that had the name, so I was like, all right, I hope I don't mess this up, but thank you. So I'll have you guys go ahead and just go around and briefly introduce yourselves. Talk to us about your experience with LMSs, and kind of talk about like your perspectives, because you guys are all coming at this from different perspectives. So Tom, I'll start with you.
Sure. Hello, I'm Tom. This is a bit of a throwback to my very first time appearing on a TLDC thing, actually, where I said the line, and I regret it now a little bit, everything we create is seen through the lens of the LMS. And I've always viewed that as a little bit of a, therefore we need to be more involved argument. Now I kind of view it as a, therefore the LMS needs to go away and stop ruining everything we do. My sort of perspective has changed. I guess the line is still true. What I do now actually is consult with businesses to help them improve the effectiveness of their L&D department, whether that's training them or advising them on tech. And a lot of that is actually spent on the platform, which could be an LMS, could be an LXP. But my view is very much that that shouldn't be a default assumption. Needing a platform does not mean needing an LMS or an LXP. It means needing somewhere your content can live and your experiences can live. Not the same thing, I guess, would be my opening statement anyway.
Very cool. Yeah, I used to tell people you can host a piece of content anywhere. You don't have to have the LMS, but it serves its purpose for sure. So Rebecca, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Yes. So my name is Rebecca Prejean. I'm the CEO and founder of EV Graphics Consulting, and I consult clients about all their L&D and training needs, but I do it through the lens of accessibility mostly. And so making sure that all of their employees, anything they put out, marketing, that kind of thing, can be used by people that have disabilities, whether that's physical ones that you can see or hidden ones that you cannot see, that kind of thing. And that also includes making sure their learning management system, if they have one, is structured properly. Like I don't subscribe to the belief that everybody has to have a learning management system. Similar to Tom, there are some situations where you don't need it. And it's still okay. You can still do certain things. You have to have infrastructure in place to make sure that's possible. But not everybody has to have one. But if you have one, you have to make sure it's an actual learning management system so it can do the thing. Because I'm sure we all know, just because somebody says, oh, I have an LMS, sometimes they just don't. You're like, I don't know what you have, but it's not an LMS. So it's really, for me, all about making sure that if they have an LMS, they're using it properly. It's actually serving them the way it's supposed to serve them. And it's using it in the way it was meant to be used and being empowering to their actual employees.
Very cool. I like the fact that you use the word empowerment, because it really does need to serve us, which is cool. And I've had people tell me, hey, I use an Excel document. I'm like, rock on. It's all good. All right, Cyndi, you're up next.
I lost you for a second, so the connection froze for a minute. So hopefully it's stable. My name is Cyndi Nagel. I'm representing the corporate side of businesses that have to have an LMS. So I am in the automotive industry. It's a highly regulated industry. So compliance upon compliance upon compliance, it's a constant wheel here at our business. So, and I'm also somebody who's working for an organization that's led from another country. So the parent organization is in Korea, and they manage the decisions about whether we get to have an LMS or not in my current organization. So, but I also have previous experience launching LMS systems, from terrible LMS systems to wonderful LMS systems, at least at the time. And also working in a large retailer here in the US, we didn't have an LMS system. So how did we, so I can definitely speak to how we were managing it without an LMS in that environment for 5,000 employees.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that's the use case all into itself. So, yeah, and when you're in compliance, honestly, the second you hear the word audit, you need an LMS. I mean, that's just kind
Right.
of how it is, or at least a learning records are. So let's talk about some current trends and challenges, and I'll just kind of do a round robin with you guys. So the question I want to ask you is, from your perspective, how are LMS platforms adapting to accommodate hybrid or remote learning environments? And then I'll just go ahead and I'll follow that up with, how do you see them evolving to also meet the needs of diverse learners? So we're talking about, hybrid and remote situations and diverse learners. Tom, I'll let you start.
I guess mixed bag would be my kind of overall response there. I think, as with all technology, every vendor has their own set of objectives, their own target audience. There are, the LMS space, I would say, is overall best described as stagnant. Most of the big players have been big players for a very long time. A lot of the small players will do something quite interesting and then get bought by one of the big players and made to disappear. That's kind of how the industry's existed for a long time. So in terms of adapting to things like, hybrid, I don't think any of them have even come close to really adapting for a hybrid environment. A remote environment, I don't think really required that much adaptation in the first place. Sort of most platforms are inherently serving content, so they've kind of been fine. Mobile is still terrible on the vast majority of them. Not having internet connectivity is still terrible on most of them. I would actually say in the last 5 or 6 years, I've seen frustratingly little innovation in the space, and certainly around sort of diversity on the learner side of things. Everyone will say it's a top priority. Having worked with a lot of these companies internally, that is never part of the conversation. So yeah, I don't want to be too negative right off the bat, but I don't think this is one of those areas where the industry is doing well right now.
Gotcha. Yeah, and don't feel like I have to do all the talking, because if you guys have comments, feel free to jump in and chat with each other too. So, and Rebecca, I'll let you take that one too, because I know you definitely have different focuses. So
Definitely have a few different focuses, but I will say this: I do feel like overall, the vast majority of learning management system companies are pretty mundane, boring, and stagnant. And that feels really negative, as Tom says, but it's kind of true. Your big ones have been big for a while. They don't have a lot of innovation that they're doing at the moment. I don't know if they even go so far as to think about where the learner is in terms of, their services and their offerings. I really don't think it goes that far for most of them. Most of them, it really lends itself to, what is the content doing? How do people get the content into the platform? How do they take the courses? You might see some individualization about like the learning journey, and things like that, but even that to me it's lacking. And I think we can go back and forth about why these things are the way that they are, why these companies don't feel the need to innovate, but I think it just goes back to not really understanding what a learning management system can do outside of just housing the things, right? Because when we think about that, when you talk about to companies about learning management systems, they automatically think a lot about compliance, like Cyndi was talking about earlier. And that's, of course, well, how do we get the things in there? How do we track it? The rest of it is kind of irrelevant to what I'm trying to do. And so that can really lean itself to the stagnation that we're seeing, ultimately. So I don't really think it even goes that far for most of these companies in terms of how are we empowering learners? How are we adapting to learners in different spaces? I just don't think it moves that far for them, even though we're in a space now where it needs to for them, and they need to do it quickly because now the people are finding other ways to kind of circumvent learning management systems, because it's like, I'm paying all this money for this thing, but it's not giving me what I need ultimately. And why can't I just go over here and get this if it'll save me money and all of the things? So it really is the turning point, I think, for learning management system companies.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder how many user studies they do, like to really look at how people are using systems and how many times they may somebody might go to a different tool to find information rather than using the LMS. So, but maybe that's something that we start to push for, is say, hey, like come in and really study how we're using this and how we have different use cases, because every business has different verticals, different users, different verticals, different needs, and maybe start to build those personas out, and from a marketing perspective, I always think, your persona should drive your product development. So I don't know, maybe we need to be the people to push for that. So
Just
and
to,
Cyndi?
just to add to that.
Oh,
Sorry,
yeah.
continue. I was just going to say, from the experience, because I was a product manager for an LMS provider, please tell the companies that, because there is always pressure on product teams to not waste time doing that stuff, because everyone wants to move quickly, especially when 2-letter new technologies pop up and it just needs to be done today so we can market it. Tell companies that, and product teams will love you and want to spend all their time with you, because they need allies like that to make the companies want to do it, because it's expensive. It's hugely expensive to delay development to do that research, but it will create a better product. You're right.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah, I agree with both Tom and Rebecca. I've worked with right now I have one of the biggies, right? So we use SAP SuccessFactors at Hundig, and not my choice. It's just part of the ERP. It's part of the infrastructure. And sometimes I think the LMS providers are letting the accessibility issues lie with whoever's creating the content versus what they have to do in the LMS to make it more accessible. So I agree with Tom. I think it's on us as training leaders and developers and designers to be pushing the expectation that these systems will adapt to what we know is at least 20% of our employee populations, our learner populations. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, this is good. And I guess we figure out how we have that voice. Maybe it is our dollars that speak. I don't know. It's somewhere it does have to change. And the systems are, definitely old. I mean, I think the first time I worked with the system, it was, 15 years ago, and I don't know how much change I've seen since then. And we do tend to treat, learners as one size fits all, which is definitely not the case. No company has, like that kind of a scenario at all. You get engineers, you get people on factory floors, you get people who have special, needs in their learning. And, I think you just really need to build that out. So maybe our dollars and how we make our purchases and how we make our decisions is how we kind of push for this. So
The dollars always speak. Money always speaks.
It does, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and money is a key driver in a lot of things. And, we see that in other industries. I just think maybe this is one of those where it's lagging a little bit. And actually, let me just focus my next question on to Rebecca. So this is regarding accessibility and inclusivity specifically. And this is the question I have, is what are the most critical considerations for ensuring that these platforms are accessible to diverse learners, including those with disabilities? And disabilities take, a wide range, the seen and the unseen. And if you've seen any that are more inclusive than others, can you tell us how those are better?
I laugh a little bit because I'm like, learning management systems, I just feel like they are horribly lacking in all things accessibility. Especially kind of given, Toddi, you mentioned you've been working on like your first platform like 15 years ago versus where it is now. The needle hasn't moved that far.
Yeah.
A lot of the times it takes a lot of customization to get an LMS to be even remotely accessible. So I wouldn't promote any one over any other, because a lot of the times you will still use a lot of time to customize them. Sometimes that can be custom HTML. I actually do that for a lot of my clients, where I'm literally having to code to make it function in a way that is accessible for folks. When we start talking about how to figure out when to purchase, I always kind of lean towards making sure that they actually have some customization settings. Can we customize colors? Can we customize learning journeys? Can we customize actual learner profiles? Can we make good standardization practices that can lean into what the LMS actually has? So trying to find a platform when you're considering diverse learner needs really stems on what functions they have at the end of the day. What things can I leverage that might not be perfect, but I can kind of lean into a bit, maybe with somebody that knows a bit more. Like, I think it was Tom that was saying, it could have also been Cyndi, showing where I'm at this morning, who mentioned that a lot of these companies let accessibility fall on the people who create the content.
Yeah.
That's largely where it's going to fall. But if you're trying to look for a platform that is accessible, think more on customization and settings. Is there a lot of customization available, or is it kind of, you don't have access to things? You don't have access to coding. You don't have access to change themes. You don't have the ability for it to figure out what kind of recommendations it can make, for maybe a training that would work for this person. It's always got to be about customization when we start talking about accessibility, what that platform will let you do versus what a lot of the smaller ones, to be honest with you, are like, well, here it is. This is the box it comes in. You might be able to put a bow on the box, but you're not going to be able to change like the outside. You're not going to be able to change the color. You're not going to be able to do a lot of finagling with this box over here. It's in the box. This is what it is. Accept it. And that's what I find with a lot of the smaller LMSs. Some of them will try, like Tom said, a few fun things that like, ooh, maybe they're going to be the one to break, and then they get swallowed up and you never hear from them again. You never hear about those features again, because, some of them are just like, we've survived this long without it. Why do we now need to go down that road? And it's sad, but that is the state of things. If we've survived this long, why do I even need to go down that road? Nobody's asking me to. Nobody's forcing me to. I'm fine right where I'm at.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, and actually, that being said, I'm actually looking at one of my other questions, but of course, customizations cost extra usually, and that's kind of been my experience with LMS implementations. Extra work, extra money, extra help. Sometimes you'll have to hire a third party to help you get the coding done, somebody like you. How often are companies having to do that kind of work to chase customizations to improve the experience? Is that common?
For me, it's pretty common.
Okay.
I'm like, at least, I think, let's see, if I look over the last 6 months and I look at just the clients I've had, I would say at least 80 to 90% I'm customized.
Wow.
And I'm doing a lot of customization, and it costs a lot of money to do that customization. They're fairly okay with doing it, but sometimes I've got to really explain the reasons why and what we're doing, and we've got to be very strategic about it. So in a lot of ways, for a business owner like me, it's great. I'm like, fantastic, repeat business. As an overall strategy, however, and something for sustainability, longevity, it's not sustainable. There's no way a client can keep this ongoing or whatnot. Right. And so it really does behoove us in the learning and development space to really think more purposefully if we're talking about accessibility. Like, I feel I hope I don't upset anybody when I say this. I feel like sometimes in L&D, we get very, very hyper-focused on just specific areas. When we start talking about accessibility, we only think sometimes about the content.
Right.
What is the content doing? Is this accessible? And even to a certain degree, we start getting hyper-focused on specific parts of the content. Mm-hmm. Like, color contrast. They're just these big things. And we sometimes fail to go outside of that into the world of learning management systems. So when we start thinking about those buying decisions, we start thinking about our budgets, we start thinking about contracts with these vendors, it doesn't even enter our scope of thought. Even though if you talk to any L&D person most of the time lately and mention accessibility, top of their mind. One of the first, probably top 3 to 5 things we're going to talk about, accessibility for the learners, that kind of thing. But when it comes to other parts, we just kind of let it fall. So it behooves us as an L&D people to not let it fall. Like you said earlier, that's where we're missing it. We're not forcing anybody to have these conversations. We're not forcing them to reevaluate stuff. And that's that disconnect. Like we drive a lot of that money. If we were asking those conversations and forcing that more, you'd probably see more of a change.
Right. Well, an accessible product is better for everybody. I mean, I guess that's kind of my mindset. So I don't, again, it's how do we push that? And what you just said kind of affects something else I was thinking about is like that total flow of the learning. If your content is the only place where you have accessibility addressed, what about the rest? Like after somebody has finished something else and, they have to search in the platform, like, are they finding what they need even within the platform without customization? So a lot to think about, a lot to unpack there. Anybody else want to jump in on this?
I can add. So yeah, I think that the LMS systems, I mean, the big ones are hearing the clamor of instructional designers and learning managers that want to bring more accessibility into L&D. I do think that some of the bigger LMS systems out there are listening and at least exploring, which is great news. So again, I think the more that in user conferences and user forums for these LMS systems that we keep expecting them to catch up, the better. And we're also seeing more of the professional industry associations, like ATD is very focused on DEI right now and accessibility, and that is a change. It's something that they're putting out now in terms of checklists for your LMS or your training programs or your materials and whether they meet some accessibility guidelines. Like at least they're putting those things together and they're talking to some of the right people in the field, like Rebecca, that are, providing them that information to at least give leaders more checklists and things to be aware of and things to explore.
Right. And finding the right people is often part of the question too. It was part of what we discussed yesterday on the charter stuff, is find the right people to tell you what they need. Very cool. All right. And Tom, do you have any thoughts on this?
The only thing I would say on that note is when I was a product manager for an LXP, I interviewed a lot of people. No one ever asked me for accessibility features. Not one person, not once. And they were all L&D people. They would ask me for what new AI features we were going to have, what content authoring features we were going to have. No one ever, not once, in hundreds of interviews asked for an accessibility feature. So I think I'm not going to say it's on us and not on them. It's a bit of both. But if you're chasing your LMS for what's the AI roadmap look like, are you chasing in the same way for these accessibility features? And if you are, awesome. If you're not, stop saying it's your top priority, because clearly it's not. Or make it your top priority and change what you ask for. But you can't have it always, and these platforms only have so much development. So I use myself as an example. I had a squad of 8 developers. So if I had 30 features being demanded of me, I couldn't develop 30 features. So I've got to figure out what do most people want.
Right.
And so if everyone's asking me for content development and not accessibility, from a business perspective, where do I put my development effort? We've got to, it's all about what we're asking for at the end of the day.
I agree, Tom. And I just want to add a little bit. I think it's on also, again, on us to reassess our audience. I think that many organizations may not be aware of what the true accessibility needs are in the organization, and so until someone is coming to the table with the questions for the learners, and of course, You know, my goal as a learning and development manager is to make this easier on my audience, you know, so that means reassessing the needs and making sure we're taking in accessibility needs that the audience have. You know, are they using screen readers? Will the LMS, you know, be able to work with that screen reader, or mouse clicks or whatever it is, you know? So I think we need to take a step back and take that responsibility of making sure our analysis is incorporating those questions and isolating those needs. So.
Interesting. So, kind of taking a little different track here, let's talk about the user experience and engagement. And, you know, engagement being, you know, keeping that learner in a place where, you know, they can learn and hopefully meet objectives and be able to demonstrate, you know, performance based on learning. What general features of an LMS do you guys think are most effective in improving learner engagement and retention? Do you have any thoughts on it? Anybody want to jump in, or should I pick on one of you?
I'm going to be really boring and say single sign-on, because
Okay.
no one's going to remember their login. That's the simple, hard truth of an LMS. I'd love to say it was some really clever, like L&D focused feature, but just being able to get on the platform, big win. So I think in terms of like biggest blockers for people actually engaging with the platform, no one's going to remember their LMS login if it's not single sign-on. So that's got to be the biggest thing for me.
And I'm not going to argue with you one bit, because I think I probably spent, I don't know, 2 of my days out of 5 on my last LMS admin job working on single sign-on access for different groups, because I had internal and external users, and that was our single biggest problem. So like, how do I get there? I'm like, well, use your SSO. Well, my SSO doesn't work. So we'd have to go back in the back end and reconfigure again. And the ridiculous part is because we're going back to Azure, you know, a tool that we've integrated with to actually set that up. But it was a vast improvement just to get people in to start doing the learning that they needed to do. Any other thoughts?
I would agree single sign-on. I would agree any kind of closed captioning, if it's available within the LMS that's not already in the e-learning itself, or the virtual learning that's happening within Teams or Zoom. I would love to see more LMSs incorporate Teams and Zoom within the space.
Right.
That would be huge. You know, I turn captioning on and transcription on for I just make it automatic. And people are always surprised to see that, but it's helpful because we're seeing that, like, the younger generation, they love to watch TV shows with closed captioning on. So there's, you know, people that really enjoy that, and it helps for those that need that. And I'm also a huge fan of just providing transcripts wherever possible. So for all of our videos, we definitely add that in. So the ability to have that course bookmark, you know, be able to add these additional assets into the course, the transcripting or whatever is important for us.
And obviously, those are my staples.
Yes.
Closed captions and transcripts. Cyndi's completely speaking my language. In terms of just improving learner engagement and retention overall, I'm a huge advocate of personalized learning journeys. Like, personalized learning paths for me are probably the biggest feature that I think every LMS should have, because again, it's personal to the person. I think that there's a lot of learning management systems that are doing something similar to that. Do I think they're as effective as they should be? No. But there's a lot of things. We can go back and forth about a lot of elements that aren't quite that way. I've also seen a lot of my clients in particular, like discussion boards, collaboration things, where kind of there's that social interaction to it. You know, we live in a world right now where everybody wants to be connected. They want to stay connected. I'm getting old, so I'm like, I don't know if I want to necessarily be as connected, but everybody that I know, they really want to be connected. Like they want to be able to talk about these learning journeys. They want to be able to talk about their content that they've learned. And so that's a really big piece and does kind of help with the engagement and retention, because you tend to remember experiences, right? As
Absolutely.
people, that's really where our minds go nowadays. Yeah, we can remember some data and some facts, but we tend to remember experiences more than anything. Like that's why you have this whole market of people living life through experiences. And so the social learning helps that. Some people will say gamification helps that. Gamification is a whole different story for a whole nother day on a whole nother panel in my mind. But it's all about experiences. And so giving people personalized learning paths, giving them the ability to kind of create moments with each other. Those are the things that help kind of build those experiences.
Right. No, it's interesting because as I'm hearing all of you talk, I'm thinking about like practices that basically could be borrowed from other mediums, right? So, Amazon Prime actually not only has closed captioning, but they actually have like a mode that you can go into if you are low vision, where it'll describe what's in a scene on a video. I think about the people who watch TV shows and then go and talk about the experience of the show because it was something that was meaningful to them, relating back to that experience. There's a number of practices I think we could be borrowing, from some other mediums out there to make things more engaging, especially in the LMS. It's funny because I actually love areas where people can go and ask questions of each other. The challenge that I've had in the past is getting people to engage, to go in and see those as safe spaces to ask questions. I built them. I've said, hey, we're going to have this monitored on a weekly basis. Somebody's going to answer your questions. And then finding that people are not getting into those spaces. So, it's always interesting to see what happens here. So, in terms of, are there tools that we can integrate that might make our learning management systems more engaging or make for a better learner journey? Other communication. Cyndi, you mentioned like the Zoom tools being integrated and things like that. Anything else that would be helpful? Anybody have any thoughts on?
I think it's a good time to maybe talk about AI and how AI could help on top of our LMS systems, in terms of helping people find what they need in the system a little bit easier. They're not always intuitive. So, I'm exploring the Joule AI that SAP has just launched. So we have our IT teams kind of looking at that to see if that's something we can incorporate in success factors and SAP. And it happens to also integrate with Microsoft 365, which is what we use. So it would essentially be like our own LLM. So I think that those types of things and having that agentic AI there available so that when somebody comes in and says, I want to learn more about diversity, equity, and inclusion and find me a course, they can pop that question into the agent and have it at least put them in the right direction or send them to the part of the LMS that has that. So I think those will be helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting. It makes me think of the closed loop large language models that are based on your company's, information, your best practices.
Exactly.
And I know it's been used kind of in test cases in the past where, it's been a little bit more ratcheted down. So we're not teaching the language models, everything that comes from our proprietary data. But I think that a lot of companies have a lot of like collective cultural pieces of information. Could be very useful. I know I had like a business acumen class I taught. It was a blended class. We'd have a engagement in person and we'd have like e-learning prerequisites and things like that. And I'm thinking, how nice would it have been for someone to have asked for an example of, this particular mathematical calculation somebody was using, to determine like the net worth of something, or what the value of a contract was according to how we rank and stack things. So, I think there's uses for that if we can incorporate that in there. And also, gives someone a place to ask a question, maybe in a safe space if it's a large language model and it's a closed system. But yeah, there's so much to think about with respect to AI, but I think that might be one of the areas where we can start to find better engagement. How about data and analytics, like in reporting? How are the data analytics and reporting used to measure the effectiveness in LMS platforms and, in terms of demonstrating performance? Tom, you're kind of more of a performance measure guy. Do you have any thoughts on this, on how they can help or hinder?
I feel like I'm just the negative view guy on this one. So I have yet to find a platform that even comes close to delivering useful data. Largely because everyone goes, well, there's your score and report. What more could you possibly want? It's like, great, I now know what they scored in the quiz. That gives it makes us feel good if they got a high number and bad if you got a low number. But other than that,
Right.
sorry, it's a bit of a useless bit of data, really. It doesn't tell us anything about where they work. So weirdly, and this kind of goes to the integration point as well, the integrations I want to see is about making it so the user never has to go anywhere near the LMS. I want the LMS to house the data from the content data, but then there's no reason that an end user ever has to see it. I want them to do their job. So spend their time in, I don't know, Teams or Google Workspace or whatever they're working in, because that's where the interesting data is. That's where the data that actually tells me, is this person better at their job now? Or have they just scored high on a quiz over here that makes me feel good? Ideally, I'd like all that data going to one place. So a tighter integration between the LMS, the LXP, whatever, and wherever we work would make that easier. Tie in the HR data, tie in the broader business data, and all of a sudden you've actually got something useful. Because at the minute, you've got to collect all those things manually and then do the fun data job, or offload that to AI, as I think most people now probably are. So yeah, it's not great, I think, and a lot of the innovations seem to be on, we'll put it in a graph for you rather than a spreadsheet. It's like, cool, that's not that helpful, but thanks very much. And people get very excited about this when you talk about it. That's thinking, now you can build a dashboard and email it to people in your business. It does sound good until you ask that, but what does that data tell us other than the fact of, oh, look, we've got a graph? Again, unfortunately, not very much. I will find something positive to say by the end of this, I promise. I'll figure something out for the end.
I just don't think it's all negative in terms of how I'll put it this way. I don't think Tom's being completely unreal in what he's saying.
Right.
Because a lot of the data and the analytics that we tend to look at really are kind of around things that make us feel good. Like, did they get a good score on this quiz? Versus like all those harder data numbers that showed, are they better at their job? Are they more productive? Are they more engaged? Are they, did they learn an actual new skill? Like, are they proficient at it? Those are things that really are lacking in data and analytics. And I know some people are on this call and they're like, this doesn't sound good at all for learning management systems. Like, I need to do something else, obviously. But it's not really that. I think it all boils down to a balance between us as the L&D people and the learning management system. The learning management system is there to kind of house things for us, to give us information, all that kind of stuff. But then we really need to be asking ourselves, are we really making the things to give us the information? Do we have the processes in place to get us the information that we need to actually be more effective, be more efficient in the learning and development space? Like, are we really just giving people a quiz that asks, do you like this? Do you know these 5 top questions from this thing? What could be better about this training? Those are not things that are going to give us hard, concrete answers. And then when we start asking, especially if you're not maybe at a Hyundai, place like Cyndi, right, that has like this huge budget. If you're working at a smaller place, when we start asking for better learning management systems, better tools, better this, better that, those are the things that back us up if we have the proper data to get us there. So some of it is on the learning management system side. We've acknowledged there's some lack there, but some of it really is on us to become a little bit better as well, and not necessarily rely solely on AI. And remember that there are real skills that are needed in the learning and development space to get us what we want. Now, so I'm sure somebody's looking at this like, this lady's all kinds of negative too. So maybe Cyndi can bring in some positivity, because me and Tom are not bringing it today.
I mean, I have to say, I've been here for 6 months, and one of the glaring gaps was data analytics in our training. So this team was collecting what was available in the system. Did you like the course 5 stars, right? That kind of thing, which is pretty standard in most of the LMSs. They're doing a smiley sheet. Even some of the bigger ones that will give you options of surveys, level 1 through 4, because they're following probably Kirkpatrick's model and it's built in. But we're at a point in L&D where data needs to go further and connect to performance and connect to monitoring whether someone's behavior has changed. And that requires assessment outside of most LMS systems. So we're creating a strategy around that we'll implement. So I fixed the smileys; those are gone, and I actually like more of the learner transfer evaluation method of data analytics and surveying. So LTEM, if you want to explore that, I would look at those and try to change your surveys to that. Unfortunately, those questions happen outside of the LMS. So yeah, it requires us to have, a SurveyMonkey account. And we're also begging employees to take those surveys, which is the other part of it. So, we need to kind of come up with some way to kind of incentivize, thank you for taking that, so it's always a battle of whether people will be honest. And so we're trying to change the culture around that and show that we can use the data that we're gathering to revamp programs or revamp the experience to make it, what they would like to experience. And then we're also going to be adding in those higher level evaluations, touching base with teams 6 months out, what part of that, skill building are you still using today? Did you incorporate? How is it improving your role or your results? So those are the types of things we'll be strategizing for next year.
Well, here's the good news, guys. I think that what it says is that we need the people, not AI, to be able to connect the dots here. So, and I think back to this. So, I mean, I've done, the same kinds of things. We've taken data out of the LMS systems that we had, and then taken that next step within the business to connect it to things to say, okay, are we improving performance? Do we have less IT tickets because we trained someone how to use the system? Have we had fewer accidents on the floor because someone is adequately trained according to standard and compliance? And then I actually had a director in one of my last roles that took it even further than that. And we had an entire sales training program where he would take the data from the cohorts that had gone through and done the boot camps and the learning and everything, and connected it directly to the sales wins, looking at who was on those teams that made the proposals that were winning, which is, an advanced level of is this giving us, an improvement in the performance? But it's a next level step that the LMS can't accomplish. At least we haven't figured out how to do that yet. So it gives us a more job security. We have to think it through and connect and engage with the business and figure out whether or not we're connecting to the metrics that matter. So.
Well, recently I heard Zalt Olaf say one of the best things you can do is hire data scientists into your L&D team. There's people that actually study these things, and get degrees in data analytics, and they're wonderful to bring on to an L&D team because they can kind of help tell those stories and connect those data points.
Yeah, definitely. So, and
just quickly on that note, sorry, I just wanted to add that because I think what we just said was really important, but I also think it's really important to note incremental change,
exactly.
because I know, like, because I agree. For instance, hiring like a data scientist, dream scenario, 99% of L&D teams will never get that offered as much as they'd want it, right? They'll never be able to. But then look for the smaller things. Like when creating stuff, I always say, what value can I deliver in 2 weeks? The same is actually true of this. What's the smallest thing you can change to slightly improve your use of data? Is it just asking better questions? It's still just a quiz, but is it now slightly better? And go with that approach. Because I think sometimes you can listen to this kind of thing and go, oh, well, that's it. We're so far away from doing what we should be doing. We may as well give up, right? We've all kind of felt that about something at some point. But I think, there are loads of little things you can do to move forwards as opposed to trying to get to the finish in one big jump.
Absolutely. Move the needle. I mean, and sometimes that's all we can do is, move it. So, and that being said, in terms of analytics, I'm curious if any of you think that there are any ethical considerations behind this, because, I mean, when you're really pitting like performance, like performance measurements and conversations that you might have with your manager, do you think that there's any ethical considerations with respect to how the data in the LMS is viewed, or is it a kind of a level setting function? Just curious on that.
I mean, in my mind, I'm like, I don't even know if we get to data analytics if we don't have KPIs and things to measure. Like, so when we talk about ethics, it's hard. But for me, when I just talk about just an even kill kind of thing, I think it kind of goes back to KPIs and having an actual just real level that's already been set. Because if you don't have that and you're just kind of measuring based off of what you see, your brain's going to go where it's comfortable going.
Right.
I mean,
That's true. Yeah.
Good, bad, or indifferent, it's going to go where it's comfortable going. So if you have a manager who is looking at data and they're like, oh, look at Sally over here. She's doing really, really well. But maybe they have a good rapport with Sally. maybe that's just how they roll.
Right.
They're going to think very differently from maybe looking at Jason's stuff, who's not doing as well, but maybe they're annoyed with Jason. Maybe Jason's difficult, but maybe Jason needs accommodations or something like that. They're going to think very differently. And so some of that has to be taken out of their hands.
Yeah.
We actually need to have a standard of looking at things so it can be ethical. Like the standard helps the ethics. That's just the way that kind of rolls, because we're starting to measure everybody with on the same playing field. Like, this is what they should be hitting. If they're not hitting this, then this is what happens, and this is what happens.
Right.
That kind of stuff. So you talk about ethics, I'm like, it almost has to be, in my mind, taken out of the LMS conversation and taken into, do we even have a standard to begin with?
Right.
Which a lot of companies don't even have that.
A lot of big companies even don't have standards.
No, they're just like, yeah, you're doing really well. I don't hear any complaints about you at all. Like, doing great.
So we have a few minutes left. Let's talk about the future direction of the LMS. That's the elephant in the room, right? Are any of your organizations moving away from the traditional LMS? If so, what are you using? I mean, is it necessary for you to use traditional like file formats like SCORM or anything like that? I'm just curious what you guys are doing in your own situations.
No. Well, we have to use SCORM. Our current system has issues, although it will accept an MP4, a PDF. It doesn't complete the training as we would like it to. So we have to SCORM wrap everything so that the employee can just experience it, hit the end, and then the system tracks their training time and whatever responses we needed from the course. So for us, it's limited by what the system accepts. And so we use SCORM 1.2. I know it's ancient, but that's what works best in success factors. So if you're shopping for a LMS, you definitely want to find out which version of published file works best in the system. So that's going to be a limiter for sure.
Right. I think 1.2 is just complete or incomplete at this point. It doesn't give you much data
Right.
beyond that.
Which is again why we use SurveyMonkey for survey data. We just add the link into the course, you know, before you can
Right.
leave. Quickly do the survey kind of thing.
Right. Sounds like you're living in some of the same spaces that I've lived in the operational training, where you have to really, consider SCORM files as validation
Yep.
for completion of things that are with respect to training and safety and
Yep.
everything else. So, all right. So, are there any technologies that you guys see that could become like playing a significant role in the future of LMS platforms? Like, I mean, when we talked about AI, what about? I mean, is the thought of AR, VR, or anything, in the alternative spaces still something we hope to see, or any like better gamification? I mean, is there anything that you guys would like to see in the LMSs?
I mean, I'd like to see LMS companies stop talking about gamification altogether, but focus on stuff that works. But sorry, that's a hot take for the end of the show. But I would like to see them acknowledge the fact that what they are is a website. And so they should operate like any other website. There's no need for them to be 10 years behind the rest of the internet. So like the client I'm working with at the minute, big, highly regulated finance organization, looked at every LMS that was viable and just went, no, these are all awful. We're just going to build our own. We built a website. It tracks. We have better reporting than any LMS I've ever seen. We can track everything from logged in at this time, clicked on this, clicked on that, did this, answered this question with exactly this information, scored this, did that. We know everything about everyone that goes on the platform, and it costs nothing compared to an LMS.
Wow.
There is a real problem as long as LMSs wall themselves off from the rest of internet technology, especially given the fact that no one had to write a line of code to achieve that in that business. We use no code web development tools.
Wow.
So there is really no reason for them to wall themselves off anymore, other than the fact that they can charge loads because they make people feel like it's a different thing. So rather than sort of quote unquote exciting technologies like AI and VR and AR, I would actually rather see them become a little bit more simple, become more basic, become more affordable and more flexible.
Okay. All right. That's fair enough. Anybody else?
I mean, I'm like the only other person would probably be me. I would probably say closer to Tom. But in a nutshell, I really would like to see learning management systems just do better.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need you to be perfect. I don't need you to be able to do all the things, but I need you to be more efficient.
Okay.
I need you to be more effective, and I need you to move into a space where people are not having the conversation about whether the learning management system as a whole is dead. To me, when people start having that conversation, there is something wrong, because that means that they view your technology as completely antiquated and unnecessary. Even though we're sitting here today, we have already talked about it is useful in some cases. It is useful in some ways. And for some clients, it's a necessity. Like, they're probably never going to be able to step away from that. But when people are having that kind of overall conversation about your technology, it speaks to there being a large problem. They don't feel like you are modern. They don't feel like you are moving. They don't feel like you are innovating. And they're like, we are paying too much money to not have the things that we want to have or that we need to have. And your competitors aren't much better. So that's the only reason that we're staying with you, is because the alternatives aren't really where we want them to be. But heaven forbid the alternatives become something that they want them to be. Everybody will move from you. So when I think about it in that space, I just want LMS systems to realize you have to innovate, you have to become more efficient and effective, or you will be replaced. That is the world that we are living in today, especially when we talk about AI, right? We talk about all these things. We talk about what Tom just mentioned. There are possibilities. People just have to kind of go into that space. And it only takes one person to move before the needle is completely switched. So
Right.
that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely setting a new standard. Yeah, it's interesting because like I was doing virtual reality training in 2012. That's in the way back, but we didn't do it using the LMS. We took Unity, we created a gamer system, and we actually used game software for something that was more gamified, and trained our robotics users. These were EOD robots, on how to use the systems using the actual heads-up display, the same hand controllers that they use. We taught them muscle memory, but we couldn't load it to the LMS. It wouldn't accept it. So, what we did is we created what we needed, but we did it outside of the LMS in that case. Some of them now will support things like 3D manipulation, but then, that gets pretty expensive as well, because there's some really unique technologies with 3D manipulation and overlays and stuff like that. I've actually seen some of the automotive manufacturers that will use overlays for training. And I don't know if you've ever seen this, Cyndi, but it's fascinating. Volvo did this, so that you could train someone on the location of parts with an overlay. I think they may have been using PTC software at that point to do that too. But there's some cool stuff. So yeah, I think we're at time. Anybody, I'm looking for questions out there. I'm not seeing a lot of questions. I think Cyndi answered some of the questions that were in the chat as far as the guidelines for the surveys, the evaluation criteria. Anybody else have any? Hang on, let me just check messages at the bottom here. Oh, that's right. We have one awesome panel. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you, Gail. Appreciate it. Just looking to see if there's any other questions or Q&A. No Q&A. All right. So I think we'll 4 minutes till, and we're about to wrap it up. But guys, this was great. Seriously, really love the perspective that you bring to this. And like I think if some of the LMS manufacturers out there were to listen to this, they would realize that we really do have some big opinions with respect to the tools that they're handing over to us for a lot of money. And I think that, we could make them better if we could partner and actually do some, better studies and send me your suggestion that we actually go and study our people and present this data back to them. It's not a bad one. It, puts the load on us because we know our users better than they do. But I think we can make big improvements on the LMS moving forward, or maybe not using the LMS and using something different, because I think it's going to evolve. But it's definitely an interesting conversation. And the different use cases are fascinating to me as well, because I've been stuck in that compliance world where I have nothing to do but, provide complete or incomplete data to auditors. That's so much fun. Anyway, if you guys are good, we'll go ahead and close it out. And we have another session today, by the way. And we have Kathy LeMay, who's coming on it's going to be 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. or 10 a.m. Pacific time. So I think Luis has that link already in the schedule if you guys want to join on for that one too. And thank you again so much for joining us, all of you. And close it up. Take care, everyone.
Cheerio.